The year was 2014. A new Godzilla film was on the cusp of being released. The first since 2004, and fans were pumped. Everything about it looked amazing. The trailers were haunting and atmospheric, and it made it clear that, unlike the last time the US tried adapting the Japanese icon for Western moviegoers, this time it was being done right, bringing Godzilla back to his roots as an unstoppable force of nature. But perhaps the single biggest element of the film that drew the most interest from average moviegoers was the casting, specifically that of Bryan Cranston. At the time, the man was riding the wave of massive success due to his career-defining performance as Walter White in the AMC series Breaking Bad, which at the time had just ended to critical and audience acclaim, thus making Cranston an actor whose projects would be followed with heightened interest. It was a perfect storm of circumstances, then, that Cranston's first major blockbuster following this was in fact Godzilla, which Warner Brothers was more than happy to capitalize on. The advertising for the film placed very explicit focus on Bryan Cranston, hyping the film up to look like he would be duking it out with the Big G himself. There is no doubt that this contributed to the film's very impressive $93 million opening weekend, attracting audiences that maybe would normally not be very interested in seeing a Godzilla movie. Things took a sharp downward turn, however, when people actually saw the movie and discovered that Bryan Cranston is only a supporting character who dies off in the first act. This left a bad taste in people's mouths, which, along with the slow burn nature of the film, contributed to the divisive response that continues to this very day. But what if, in an alternate universe, Bryan Cranston's character Joe Brody never died? How would it have changed the film, and by further extension, Legendary Pictures' Monsterverse? No doubt this is something I and many fans have thought about, so I thought it would be fun to take a crack at it myself and imagine a version of Godzilla 2014 where Joe Brody not only did not die, but continues to be a major presence in the story in a way that continues his story arc to its logical conclusion. To be clear, this is not going to be an extensive scene-for-scene rewrite, but more of a broad strokes thought experiment on how Joe's continued presence would have made for a better film, which I think we can all agree would have been the case. Because the reason that Joe's death was so disappointing was because the film had done a pretty decent job getting you invested in his character, setting him up as a tragic figure looking for answers for a traumatic event that split his family apart. Up until his death, the film is split about evenly between Ford and Joe's points of view. The first act is essentially a father-son mystery adventure, and story-wise, at least on the human side, this is when the film is at its most engaging. This is what makes Joe's death so jarring. It doesn't feel organic to the previous 40 minutes. The goal then of this rewrite is to correct this, to continue the father-son narrative going on. The story is still about family, specifically about two generations, a father and his son, one who had lost his family, and the other who still has time to save his. This would have given the film a much more potent, cohesive thematic undercurrent, which makes it all the more baffling that the writers didn't capitalize on this. First off, everything up until Joe's death stays the same, with the exception of one thing. There is no Dr. Graham. No offense to the actress Sally Hawkins, but the character is rather superfluous, and will be even more so with Joe remaining in the film. Serizawa can still have an underling, but she will be a very minor character meant to show the inner workings of Monarch more than anything, and so would not need to be played by an actress of Hawkins' stature. So instead of dying from his fall, Joe is merely injured, and is brought in along with Ford to see Serizawa's presentation. Both Ford and Joe are flabbergasted by what they are being told, with Joe in particular incredibly distraught, accusing Serizawa and Monarch of hiding the truth and endangering the world. More importantly, he blames them for Sandra's death, saying that they should have warned them before it could attack the Janjira power plant. Instead of making excuses, Serizawa stoically lets him vent, merely saying that they have made mistakes and now is the time to correct them. Joe asks how he intends to do that, and this is when Serizawa brings up Godzilla again, saying that he has the power to restore the balance that they have destabilized. Joe is skeptical, thinking it is absurd to put the fate of the world in another monster. As you can see, having Joe present in this scene would have given it a lot more dramatic weight. Godzilla is still set up as a possible savior, but with Joe there acting as the skeptic, it makes you question the premise a bit more in direct relation to Joe's point of view, which gets you more emotionally invested in the story, especially because it's coming from a character you care about. This scene is also important in that it sets up Joe and Dr. Serizawa's future professional relationship, which starts out fairly antagonistic antagonistic but develops gradually over the course of the film. After the presentation, Ford says he is leaving to save Elle and Sam, which Joe fully supports, telling him that while he wasn't able to save his family, Ford still has a chance to save his. Joe also tells him that he is staying on board the Saratoga to further advise on the situation, figuring that since he was right once about the M.U.T.Os, perhaps he can be right again. This is when Ford says he is sorry for not believing in his father. They reconcile with a hug, with Joe telling Ford that together they will beat these things and avenge his mother. Following this point, virtually everything with Ford stays the same. As he is in the finished film, he acts as a point of view for the monster action, while Joe acts as the point of view for the scientific military exposition. As a nuclear expert, he is able to shine further light on the nature of the M.U.T.Os. He seamlessly integrates himself into the operation, becoming an unofficial member of Monarch. Here we see Joe come alive again, so to speak. Instead of the sad, pathetic man we saw post Sandra's death, we see Joe back in his element, showing the same degree of intuition and foresight we glimpsed in the prologue. This is his rehabilitation, and as such is an integral part of his character arc. Given that the whole Hawaii sequence is pretty much perfect as is, that would stay the same. The only difference is that Joe follows Serizawa up to the decks of the Saratoga to witness Godzilla's appearance himself, looking on with terror as he makes his way ashore. Before and after this, through further study of the male M.U.T.O bioacoustics, Joe is now the one who theorizes that it was calling out to something, and things play out the same, with Serizawa telling the military to check the nuclear waste repository in Nevada, where the female M.U.T.O hatches. When Stenz puts into motion the plot to use the A-bomb to lure and destroy all three monsters, Joe has mixed feelings, wanting to see the M.U.T.Os dead, but understanding Serizawa's opposition, as he himself knows the dangers of radiation. Joe tries to rationalize the strategy to Serizawa, and this is where he pulls out his father's watch, explaining his opposition to Joe in an elegant way. Joe understands and asks Serizawa what he would propose they do instead. He brings up Godzilla again, noting that he has done nothing but pursue the M.U.T.Os, that if they just let him do his thing, their mistake will correct itself. Joe remains a skeptic, but a little less so than before. Throughout the rest of the film, Joe's presence will act as a bouncing off point for Serizawa, giving him more to do than stand around in awe like in the actual finished film. This would include scenes of exposition where Serizawa explains his past with Monarch and Godzilla, so that we get to better know him and his history with the monster. During this, we see a scientific camaraderie develop between Serizawa and Joe. Both are shown to pick each other's brains, Joe about Godzilla and Serizawa about the M.U.T.Os. Joe questions whether Godzilla really is the answer to killing the M.U.T.Os like Serizawa says, and as the film goes on and humanity keeps failing to stop them, he begins to accept the possibility that Serizawa is right, that Godzilla is the key to killing the M.U.T.Os, and by further extension, avenging his wife. This makes Godzilla the key to Joe's character arc, because it is through Godzilla that he learns that there are things beyond his control, including his wife's death, which he of course blames himself for. This takes the broad theme of nature is beyond our control and makes it deeply personal, while at the same time making Godzilla central to the story, which is another major issue with Godzilla 2014. One of the key criticisms of the film is that Godzilla feels tangential to the story rather than central to it. This would fix that by creating an underlying thematic connection between the title monster and the grief that defines the two major human protagonists. When the plan to lure the M.U.T.Os with the A-bomb fails, putting San Francisco and Joe's family in immediate danger, Joe finally sides with Serizawa and insists that Stenz concentrate on getting the bomb out of the city while Godzilla fights the M.U.T.Os. Joe and Ford reunite again during the briefing before the airdrop, only to depart just as quickly, this time with the knowledge that Ford may not make it out alive. Joe then solemnly approaches Serizawa, asking him if he really thinks Godzilla can stop the M.U.T.Os, prompting Serizawa to give him his now infamous "the arrogance of man" speech. Instead of Serizawa dropping out of the film entirely until the end, during the fight we occasionally cut to him, Joe, and the rest of the scientists and military monitoring the situation. This will help keep the tension up as a reminder of what is at stake, because while the whole world is in danger, Joe and hopefully we, the audience, are invested in this particular family and want to see them succeed. After the fight, Serizawa and Stenz are confused as to how San Francisco is still standing and not poisoned with radiation, as the A-bomb was barely out of the harbor before it detonated. Joe speculates that Godzilla, being a creature that feeds on radiation, may have absorbed it. Joe notes that if this is true, then Godzilla may have saved them twice. This fixes the massive logic hole of having the bomb go off so close to the city with no damage whatsoever. With Joe alive to see the M.U.T.Os dead, and knowing his son succeeded in saving his family, his arc is now complete. Not only was he proven right about the M.U.T.Os and his wife's death, but he now has closure thanks to Godzilla, for killing the creatures that tore apart his family and ruined his life. In contrast to the first time he saw Godzilla in Hawaii, he now looks on with pure awe along with Serizawa as Godzilla departs, ever grateful for having saved both the world and his family. and so Joe and we the audience are allowed emotional catharsis, making the ending much more satisfying than as is. To be honest, the more I thought about this potential version of the movie, the more frustrated I got. While I genuinely like Godzilla 2014 and think it's one of the better Godzilla movies, there's no denying that it has glaring story issues, mostly of wasted potential. While the action and filmmaking are top-notch, the human drama is severely lacking, and as you can see, with another rewrite, we could have gotten a near masterpiece, I think. A film that takes a macroscope thematic undercurrent of the Godzilla franchise and applies it to a micro scale by applying it to a great character played by a great actor. A film about acceptance, about letting go of grief, using monsters as metaphor as the best monster films do. As is, the version of the film we got has a bit of this, but it's not nearly as potent or as elegant as it could have been. Bryan Cranston's character had the potential of making for a really great film, but instead of capitalizing on this, the writers just callously discarded him. For whatever reason, I cannot say. It's a real shame regardless. But then I got thinking even further. How would the survival of Joe Brody affect the sequel, Godzilla King of the Monsters? With Joe alive, the potential to continue on his story is there, but what exactly would that story be? Well, again, just like with Godzilla 2014, let's keep the story the same and simply consider how Joe's presence would alter what's already there. And after doing this, I must say that I think the film would have also been improved in some ways. So let's say that after having proven himself invaluable in handling the M.U.T.Os in the last film, Joe is now a permanent member of Monarch. By the time King of the Monsters starts 5 years later, him and Serizawa are near equals within the organization, and have developed a deep working relationship with one another. We won't be bringing back the rest of the Brodies. Just throw in some exposition early on about how Ford is permanently back with his family, and how he was given a generous severance package for saving San Francisco. Joe remarks that his son deserves it, and that he deserves to be with his family. Boom, all the loose ends of the previous film are tied up. Now with the Brodies out of the picture, King of the Monsters can focus properly on its next family, the Russells. In this hypothetical version, they are still the main characters, so Joe is more of a supporting character here, but an important one, because his recent history with Godzilla works really well as a foil to Mark's. Mark being a part of Monarch before Joe joined, combined with his hatred of Godzilla, creates a lot of tension with Joe. The film would highlight the contrasting experiences both Mark and Joe had with Godzilla in 2014. While Joe's family was reunited because of him, Mark's family was torn apart. This creates a philosophical discussion between the two, further adding to the thematic weight of the film. While Mark wants Godzilla dead, Joe, along with Serizawa, insists that he's the key to their survival. I think this would create some great human drama that would hit all the harder because we, as the audience, already identify with Joe, and to maybe a lesser extent Serizawa. Most of King of the Monsters would play out pretty much exactly the same, just with Joe being a major part of the team that chases down Alan Jonah as he goes around the world releasing monsters. The biggest change would come near the end, during the mission to revive Godzilla with a nuclear warhead. Basically, I would have Joe be the one who sacrifices himself to save Godzilla instead of Serizawa. Now I know this is a controversial decision, but the more I thought about it, the more I think it works, because it adds greater gravitas to the scene. Joe would insist on him being the one, as he feels it is his turn to save the monster that saved him and his family. Yes, this does take away the connection to the Japanese roots that the present scene has, but I think it makes up for that by having more of an emotional weight. In this version of the story, Joe is a character we've been with for 2 movies. He has a connection to Godzilla that the audience can connect with, which I think would make the scene extra emotional. The scene is already excellent as it is, just now imagine it with Cranston's acting and our knowledge of his arc in the last film, and I think you can see what I mean. More importantly though, replacing Serizawa with Joe would keep him in the Monsterverse series. As much as I love the symbolism of this new iteration of Serizawa sacrificing himself to save Godzilla, it essentially removes the only Japanese perspective from the story. I think Serizawa is an important character to keep around because of what he represents within this big budget Hollywood Americanized series. Also, it's Ken Watanabe, and we want him to stick around as long as possible. After this, the film would again play out pretty much exactly the same, only Serizawa is around for all of it, and can end with him looking on with pride at his savior once again. So there you have it. That's how keeping Joe Brody alive could have potentially made for a better Godzilla 2014, and maybe by extension even King of the Monsters. I hope you enjoyed this little thought experiment. As you can see, keeping Bryan Cranston as the focus could have made for a better, more emotionally evocative and thematic film. Like I said, I still like the 2014 movie a lot, but there's simply no denying that it could have been a lot better with a fairly simple rewrite. Alas, we will never see this hypothetical version of the film. But hey, a fan can dream, right?